background to the war, or rather to the Vietnam War. Who's the background of the Vietnam War? What were the reasons or the causes of the Vietnam War? But before we do that, kindly remind me of anything that you learned in the previous 2 days in regards to the Vietnam War.
Vietnamese.
What is it that you learned?
Vietnam.
When did the Vietnam War start?
1954.
1955. Yes? It was the Geneva Conference which took place in 1954. Okay. And then at the Geneva Conference, there was a Geneva Resolution. What was it? What was the Geneva Resolution?
The what?
The Geneva Resolution. What was the agreement at the Geneva Conference? Huh? The peace accords were signed in Berlin. Okay, the Geneva Accords were signed against now. IT.
Demhlaba isihlukanisi.
The Geneva Resolution was that Vietnam would be temporarily divided into along the 17th parallel. And then as a result we had North Vietnam and
South Vietnam.
South Vietnam. And then we said North Vietnam was the communist state.
Yes.
And then South Vietnam was a
Capitalist state.
capitalist state. North Vietnam was led by Ho Chi Minh. And then South Vietnam, Ho Thi Minh.
What if we say
Right. And then we said we had a city over here, which is known as Saigon. And here resided people who were known as the National Liberation Front.
Yes.
And then who later adopted an armed wing or an armed struggle and then called themselves the
Vietnam.
Viet Cong. We said the Viet Congs attained support from the Communist North,
Yes.
because they were in favor of Ho Chi Minh and the Communist North.
Yes.
And then we said aid was transported from North Vietnam via what was known as Ho Chi Minh Train. Underground tunnels or supply routes which were known as Ho Chi Minh Trains.
Yes.
Okay. And then we further said North Vietnam as a communist state was supported by which two world superpowers, or by which two countries?
USA and
It was the USSR and China. And then the capitalist South was supported by
USA.
the United States of America. Right. We are going to just by being able to label this structure, already soon a background, paragraph, or a background towards the Vietnam War. So as soon as you get to the question paper, go to the back, put your label it, and then the rest you see our Parliament events.
Yes.
Okay. Now let us look at the background to the Vietnam War. Background to the Vietnam War. Okay. We said before the Geneva Conference, Vietnam was under French domination.
Yes.
It was ruled by the French for several years. And then if there's one person who was fighting against the French, it was Ubani Ho Chi Minh. He fought for independence against the French. You understand? Okay. And then by 1954, the Geneva Accords were signed, young it?
Yebo.
And then it was agreed that, okay, Vietnam will be temporarily divided into two. And then that temporal division was going to take place or last for how long? For 2 years, young it? And then by 1956, they were supposed to hold elections, young it? Which were going to determine the fate of Vietnam, which was going to determine whether Vietnam becomes a capitalist or a communist state.
Yes.
Okay. But what happened? Did the elections take place?
No.
When's that? They were cancelled. Why were the elections cancelled?
Because many favored
Okay. What happened is that the United States of America carried out some sort of survey so as to find out if they hold these elections, if they vote in these elections in 1956, who is going to win? Is it going to be the capitalist South or the communist North? Now, and then they discovered that 80% of the capitalist South was going to vote for the communist North. You understand?
Yes.
And remember that the United States of America were in support or in favor of Ngodin Diem and the communist, the capitalist South. Dang it?
Yebo.
So what happened was they cancelled the elections. You understand?
Yebo.
Because they had found out that 80% of the South Vietnamese population are going to vote for Ho Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh or the capital communist North. And then as a result, Yemen, we then saw the National Liberation Front adopting a militant approach towards the war, man. You understand? Is that good?
Yes.
When the elections were cancelled, the National Liberation Front formed a military wing which was known or called the Viet Cong, so as to overthrow the South Vietnamese government. You understand? So as to fight against the South Vietnamese government and overthrow the South Vietnamese government. And that is because the Viet Congs or the National Liberation Front were in favor of the communist North. And then by 1964, there were over 100,000. There were over 100,000 Viet Cong soldiers in South Vietnam. Is that good?
Yebo.
Good. Okay. Now that's the background of the war. If there's one thing that we left out, remember, North Vietnam had their own army, the North Vietnamese army, and the South Vietnam, even a social army now, the ones who were trained by the US military advisors, the South Vietnamese army. Now, the South Vietnamese army were called the South Vietnamese army was called the ARVN, A-R-V-N. And then in full, it was the Army of the People of Vietnam.
The Army of the People of Vietnam.
So the South Vietnamese army was called the ARVN, or the Army of the People of South of Vietnam. Isabona? Okay. Play the phone. South Vietnam, we said it was a capitalist state under the leadership of Ngo Dinh Diem in support of the United States of America. Right? And then we all agreed that President Eisenhower deployed military advisors in South Vietnam, right? So as to train the South Vietnamese army, the South Vietnamese soldiers or troops, right? And then such the South Vietnamese army was called the ARVN or the ARVN. In full abbreviation, it is the Army of the People of Vietnam. Is that all? Yes. Okay. Now let us move to the army in North Vietnam. The North Vietnamese army, whom were experienced and trained by the Viet Minh. Remember, the Viet Minh were the people who were fighting against the French during the times of French domination in Vietnam. You understand?
Yeah,
okay. Bona, they were called the People's Army of Vietnam, which is PRVA. In full, it is the People's Army of Vietnam. Do you guys have any questions based on the background towards the Vietnam War? Questions? Right. For sure. Does anyone have a question based on the background towards the Vietnam War? Okay, send it in the
Asizwa.
Huh?
Asizwa. Komtshela ehlisa ivolume. Awu, uyamsaba. Yabo.
Send us some food.
Rasa. Iwindo. Iwindo se.
Alright, I'm watching the board, man. Just find it on it.
Makasawa no para makapalo. Bosh.
Okay.
What's Bosh?
Bueno, aquí está la prueba.
Guys, yeah? Now, we will now look at we will now look at the reasons for the United States of America to be involved in the Vietnam War. Why was the United States of America so invested in the Vietnam War? Why were they involved in a war which was thousands of miles away from the United States of America? Understand?
SMS.
Right. Now today we'll focus on mainly 5 reasons why the United States of America became involved in Vietnam. Mainly 5 reasons.
95.
5. Mainly 5. Right. Now, the first reason why the United States of America became involved in Vietnam. This one, yes, we've already covered this one. It has to do with the South Vietnamese army and the reason why they deployed military advisors in Vietnam. Why was that reason, Mama Sawam? Or what was that reason?
They were training the US soldiers.
The South Vietnamese army. Now, the first reason why the United States of America became involved in Vietnam was to train the South Vietnamese army. We can all agree that they became involved because the ARVN, or the South Vietnamese army, was too weak. To fight against the North Vietnamese army and defeat them. They needed support. Now, that is the first reason why the United States of America became involved in Vietnam. Hence why they sent, military advisors. Military advisors to train the South Vietnamese army. And then, by the year 1964, there were 16,000 US military advisors in Vietnam. Now remember, these military advisors only provided aid and support and then training to the South Vietnamese army. They were not physically fighting in Vietnam. And who deployed these military advisors?
US government.
Which president? I gave you 5 presidents, or rather 6 presidents, who were involved in the Vietnam War. Yes, Brad?
Lyndon Johnson.
Johnson.
Military advisors. President Kennedy, Siabum.
Johnson.
Johnson. Kantama military advisors akala deploy in Vietnam. I gave you timeline yesterday. When did they start deploying military advisors in Vietnam? It was in 1959. Who was the president of the United States in 1959? Yes, President Eisenhower. Now, President Eisenhower is the one who deployed, or who started to deploy military advisors. Yes. Okay. Now, let us move, or rather, there's one fact which is important that I left out about Ngo Dinh Diem. Maybe some of you guys may ask yourselves, why exactly the Viet Cong or the National Liberation Front, in support of the Communist North, what did they have against President Ngo Dinh Diem?
Yes.
One thing about President Ngo Dinh Diem, he was an unpopular leader. He was unpopular and he was a brutal leader. Now, what made him unpopular? What made him unpopular had to do with irreligion. He was a Catholic in a Buddhist country. Guess what? He was a Catholic in a Buddhist country. Now, these are both religions. I'm a Catholic now, Catholics, they're more like and then Buddhists are people who believe in the writings and teachings of Buddha. Research on that. Okay. That made him unpopular. Number 2, we said he was a brutal leader. And then number 3, he was a very corrupt leader.
Corruption.
Yes, he was full of corruption and nepotism.
Nepotism.
Oh, no.
Nepotism, which means he reserved the best jobs in South Vietnam for his family members and his close
Friends.
friends. You understand?
Yebo.
Okay. Now, the second reason why the United States of America became involved in Vietnam was because the South Vietnamese government was corrupt. Now remember, the United States, as a result of the Marshall Plan and the Truman Doctrine, they sent money to the government of South Vietnam because they wanted to stop the spread of communism and promote capitalism. You understand? Now they sent these funds to a corrupt government
Awal.
of South Vietnam. That is the second reason why the United States of America became involved in Vietnam. It is because their aid was being sent to a very corrupt government. You understand? Okay. And as a result, because Ngotin Diem was very corrupt, by 1963, Ngotin Diem was assassinated. He was assassinated. And it is argued that the United States of America helped in assassinating Ngotin Diem. Okay? He was assassinated, killed by 1963. And it is argued that the United States, the very same USA which supported him, held or held a hand in assassinating Ngotin Diem. Na? Assassinated. And then again, by 1963, 40% of rural land, of the rural areas or rural land in South Vietnam was under the control of the Viet Congs. By 1963 again, 40% of the rural land in South Vietnam was under the control of the Viet Congs. Now, let us go to the third reason why the United States of America became involved in Vietnam. Do you have a question? Okay. Now, this reason is very important. The third reason why the United States of America became involved in Vietnam. The United States of America became involved in Vietnam as a result of their containment policy. Containment policy. This containment policy was as a result or a clause of the Truman Doctrine.
Truman.
Yes, Truman Doctrine. What did this containment policy entail? Yayithini? Containment. It is to stop something. They wanted to contain or to stop the spread. No, let us put contain. They wanted to contain the spread of communism. That's in Truman Doctrine. The Truman Doctrine said or entailed that the United States of America would provide aid or assistance to any country in the entire globe which is threatened by communism. If ever your country is threatened by communists or by communism, the United States of America, as a result of the Truman Doctrine, was going to assist or help that particular country. You understand? And we know that in South Vietnam, South Vietnam was threatened by the communist North. Now, another reason why the United States became involved in Vietnam was to contain the spread of communism to South Vietnam. They did not want South Vietnam to become communists. You understand? They do not want communism to spread from North Vietnam to South Vietnam. You understand? Yes. Okay. And they did this, or rather they became involved, more especially because they knew that North Vietnam was supported by the USSR and China. So, but now we know, let us go and support South Vietnam as well. Né? Which takes us to reason number 4. Remember I said with background paragraph, you write a 3-step introduction and then background paragraph when constructing your essay. With background paragraph, I need to find the reasons for the US involvement in Vietnam. We cannot just find the United States of America fighting in Vietnam. You understand? Okay. Now, reason number 4, very important now. The United States of America became involved in the Vietnam War as a result of the domino theory. All right. The domino theory. Now let us start with explaining what a domino is. Do you guys know dominoes? Yes. Please. What are dominoes? Yes, brother. Yes, but amadice. But zimaganje. It is divided now. 1, 2, 3, 4. At times, no 2. Now, ukusamatiles. Yes, those are dominoes.
Oh.
Those are dominoes. Hey. Now that we all know what dominoes are, let us try to understand the domino theory. The domino theory entailed that, or rather the United States believed that if one country falls into communism, the neighboring countries will also follow. Dominoes. Now, if you are to place dominoes in a line, and then place another domino line, place another third domino line, and then you push one domino, what's going to happen to the other dominoes? So the United States of America believed that if one country falls into communism, the neighboring countries will also follow and fall into communism. You understand? Yes. Right? Okay. So another reason why the United States became involved in the Vietnam War was because of the domino theory. They believed that if Vietnam falls into communism, Laos, which are the neighboring countries, Laos,
Combat.
Cambodia, and Thailand would follow. So they saw the need to become involved in Vietnam so that they stop this domino theory. They stopped Vietnam from falling into communism because the neighboring countries would also follow if ever the Vietnam fell under communism. You understand? Yes. May we move to the last reason why the United States became involved in Vietnam? Yes. Now this is the fifth reason. Reason number 5.
Maybe this is my definition of
Now, the fifth reason why the United States of America became involved in Vietnam was as a result of the Gulf of Tonkin resolution or the Gulf of Tonkin incident. We spoke about that yesterday, young yes. That it is whereby a U.S. Maddox or a U.S. warship was bombed, allegedly bombed or attacked by the North Vietnamese army, yes. Which gave President Johnson the reason to deploy military combat troops. Yes, they now deployed, or rather, remember the person who deployed our military advisors was Eisenhower. Now that a U.S. ship, a U.S. Maddox, U.S. blood has been spilled in Vietnam. U.S. soldiers or U.S. troops are now or had been killed in Vietnam, man. Yes. When they were bombed and attacked by the North Vietnamese army. Giving President Johnson the reason or the power to deploy combat troops. Soldiers who are now going to fight in Vietnam and avenge their fellow American soldiers. Okay. And we said as a result of the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, it was the Gulf of Tonkin resolution which gave President Johnson the power to deploy combat troops in Vietnam. And then, by the year 1968, remember when using a Peel method to construct the body of evidence, you need a point, explanation, and evidence. Now these years and these numbers, all of these figures that I'm giving you guys, there were 16,000 military advisors and 500,000 combat troops, served as evidence, which by year 1968, there were more than 500,000 combat troops whom were deployed in Vietnam. Remember, we are speaking of U.S. combat troops, United States. Amasosha ase USA. Okay. Do you guys have any questions thus far? Based on the reasons why the United States of America became involved in Vietnam? I hear the yes. Yeah, good.
Yes. By 1964.
Yes. Yes. We said the first president to deploy military advisors was President Eisenhower. And President Eisenhower was the president in the United States from 1953 to 1961. Then by 1964, the president in the United States was Johnson. But the person who increased the numbers was Kennedy, and you are absolutely correct. This is just to say that by 1964, the large number of our military advisors who were then deployed in Vietnam were 16,000. Not that it was President Eisenhower who deployed 16,000 military advisors.
Bengizoba wrong, bhalela njalo.
Do you guys have any questions? Yes.
Kuba na deploy. Basa suhawa, mina ngibhala uhawa. Uyambika manje. Angithi ngilapho. Hayi wena. Alright wena. Number 1 loyo. Alright.
No, they were not against or the last part. I did not catch the last part. Okay. There's a question surrounding the assassination of Umbotin Diem. Now, the reason why we said it is argued that the United States assisted in assassinating Umbotin Diem is because the USA or the president of the USA voiced out Uguti, should anything happen to Umbotin Diem, the United States of America will not interfere. So you cannot say that about a person whom you are supporting 100%. Do you guys have any other questions?
No.
Yes, ma'am. No, you are doing our questions. I need them. Yes. Reason number 3, containment policy. Yes. Okay. Oh, all right. Now, the flow with this containment policy is that there's topic 1, which is the Cold War, in the Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan. In the topic 1, it's a pity because I will not cover topic 1, but I would advise that you use it as a prerequisite. Just go and study it haphazardly, not because uzobhala. You need to do topic 1, Cold War. Questions?
Balisa masonga. Mamsimang. Shani zwakala.
Mamsimango.
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 Simango.
Right, okay. Let us move to the next part. Are we done with the questions?
No. Kona kupelele space. Kupelele space.